This is not merely a political confrontation recorded in headlines, but the slow unraveling of a nation whose soul was rich long before its oil was counted. Because the United States did not strike Venezuela with an open declaration of war or columns of invading soldiers, but with something far more enduring and devastating: economic warfare, diplomatic isolation, covert pressure, and the calculated use of sanctions designed to suffocate a state from the inside while the world debated the morality of it all. Officially, Washington framed its actions as a response to authoritarianism, disputed elections, corruption, human rights abuses, and alleged criminal networks within Venezuela's leadership, presenting itself as a defender of democracy. Yet beneath this carefully polished narrative lay deeper and more uncomfortable truths rooted in power, ideology, and control. Because Venezuela is not just any country, it sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, and under a socialist system that rejected U.S. dominance, nationalized its oil industry, and openly challenged American influence in Latin America, it became a symbol of defiance that could not be allowed to stand. Alliances with rivals such as Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba further transformed Venezuela from a regional issue into a geopolitical problem for Washington, where disobedience from a resource rich nation was interpreted not as sovereignty, but as a threat to the established global order. When diplomacy failed to reshape Caracas according to U.S. interests, sanctions became the primary weapon, freezing billions of dollars in foreign assets, cutting off access to international banking, crippling oil exports, and collapsing the national currency, all under the strategic belief that enough economic pain would break the state and force regime change from within. But these policies did not fall on abstract institutions. They landed on real people, on hospital corridors without medicine, on mothers diluting food so their children could sleep with something in their stomachs, on professionals watching their life savings turn worthless overnight, and on millions forced to leave behind their homes, memories, and graves of their ancestors in one of the largest migrations in modern history. And to truly understand the tragedy, one must understand what was being crushed, because Venezuela was never just oil and politics. It was culture, music, color, and warmth. A nation where salsa and joropo rhythms flowed through neighborhoods, where families gathered for arepas filled with cheese and cornmeal that carried generations of tradition, where baseball fields echoed with childhood dreams, where festivals filled streets with laughter, dance, and faith, and where people once lived with pride in a land blessed with mountains, plains, and the Caribbean coast. This cultural richness, this sense of identity and community, did not disappear overnight. It was slowly starved as economic collapse stripped people of the ability to celebrate, to gather, to live with dignity, turning vibrant neighborhoods into places of survival rather than joy. The U.S. claimed it stood with the Venezuelan people, yet every tightening sanction tightened the grip around those very people, not around political elites who found ways to endure, proving once again that economic warfare rarely topples governments, but almost always devastates societies. Efforts to recognize opposition leaders, encourage internal uprisings, and isolate Venezuela internationally followed, reinforcing the message that resistance would be punished until submission was achieved, while the language of freedom was broadcast to the world, even as a humanitarian crisis deepened. History has shown that in the modern age, wars no longer need bombs to destroy nations, because economies can be turned into battlefields and civilians into casualties without a single shot fired. And Venezuela became a living example of how culture, stability, and human dignity can be eroded under the banner of political righteousness. The deepest tragedy is not only that a country once rich in resources and spirit was pushed to the edge of collapse, but that the price of this conflict was paid by ordinary people, by children who grew up knowing hunger instead of festivals, by elders who watched traditions fade into silence, and by families scattered across continents, leaving behind a haunting moral question that refuses to fade with time. If democracy and freedom are truly the goal, why does the path toward them so often demand the destruction of a people's culture, dignity, and hope? And when power speaks through sanctions and control, who will answer for the lives forever changed in its shadow?